Hello and welcome back to the Insights podcast. I'm Philippa Lamb with the month's key developments in accountancy. Today, we're discussing the launch of ICAEW's Economies campaign. How can members get involved and how will it aim to influence policymakers? And we'll hear about changes to filing self-assessment returns and HMRC services. With us in the studio today, we have Economies Director Suren Thiru and Technical Manager Maylim Cooper. Hello both. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Hi there.
Hi.
So Suren, the Economies campaign, what is it?
Well, it's a bit of a step back because you read newspapers at the moment, there's a lot about inflation, the cost of living crisis, that sort of thing. But what this campaign is looking at is what are those sort of big challenges facing the UK economy that make us less resilient to external shocks like the inflation hit that we've seen over the past year. It's really doing a bit of a deep dive in some of these huge issues that facing our economy, but also what businesses and the wider accounting profession can do to help solve some of these issues.
So what can members expect from it?
Well, it's a three-part series, and the first part is out this week, covering productivity investment. There's a skills segment in October and trade in November. And it's going to be a real interesting collaboration looking at what businesses themselves are doing to deal with some of these issues. But we're also convening key experts, leading academics, government ministers, top economists, to have a real look at what is happening here and also what are some of the solutions to these long-standing issues.
And you're drawing on the ICAEW Business Confidence Monitor?
Yes, that's right. ICAEW's Business Confidence Monitor is one of the biggest private sector business surveys in the UK, and it really gives us insights from across the accountancy profession, looking at all types of data around inflation, around the labour market, around what businesses are doing. So that gives us real insight into what's going on, and that helps to develop the type of solutions that these types of businesses need.
So the first theme, business investment and productivity, you just launched it. What sort of content have you produced for this one?
There's a number of interesting pieces. First, there's a film which follows a couple of really interesting businesses, looking at how they're coping in the current environment, how they're actually taking practical steps to help boost their own activity, wider investment, and a contribution to the wider economy. A lot of that is through innovation and collaboration. What we're also producing is a long read, really, which is that deep dive into some of the issues, looking at the history around productivity, why the UK has weak productivity compared to other countries, but also looking at some of the interesting solutions to that. And in that article, you'll see really interesting contributions from people like the Minister for Tech, an ex-Bank of England interest rate setter, and again, top economists and academics who are really going to provide not least outlining the problem, but also some of the interesting solutions to some of these issues.
I watched that film, actually, and it features the ice cream maker, doesn't it, Northern Block, and a plant-based milk firm, Mighty. I really enjoyed it. I mean, what are the themes you want to pull out of that film?
What was quite interesting in what both businesses are doing, and are really interested businesses, as you say, but what they're really doing is looking at ways of how can you deal with the current environment? How can you adapt your business plan? How can you adapt the way you work? But what's interesting is the two firms, they're very different businesses. What's interesting in the film is that they actually do a lot of collaboration together. And that's really key to dealing with some of these issues. And you can see the impact of these businesses on the local economy, on the lead, both based in Leeds, and the impact they've had on their economy is really striking. What you also see is the impact of the accountants that work with these businesses and the importance of those dealing with everyday issues like cash flow, those sort of things. But also when businesses like these are looking for finance, they often speak to their accountant first. So it's a really crucial role in when they're looking to get finance, looking to invest and grow their business.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly interesting because you hear from the accountants, don't you, about the particular challenges in their businesses, how they're dealing with them and how they deal with each other.
Absolutely, and that's really key. And it's important that businesses have the right advice and right framework in place to deal with some of these challenges. They can't always do it by themselves. So I think that's where accountants can play a really key role, both in helping businesses invest and do better, be more productive. But also if you're looking at things like businesses who may want to export for the first time, the person they often speak to is their accountant first, because they want to get under the hood of their own business and see what some of the challenges and opportunities are there.
And there are two more themes, as you said, following in October and November. Remind me of the topics.
Well, the first one the second one, should I say, is on the future of the workforce. That's going to look at some of the issues around the labour market. So there's two big issues. There's one around shortage of supply of labour, which we've seen particularly since COVID, but also skill shortages as well. Businesses not being able to get the right staff with the right skills in place, which impact things like productivity, but also business' ability to grow. So we're going to look at some of the issues there, but also looking at some of the solutions as well. And again, we're seeing some really other interesting businesses who are taking a really innovative way of dealing with some of these issues, some of these shortages around skills.
Talking about solutions, there's a date for everyone's diaries, isn't it? There's a Regions Economies Summit. That's November?
Yes, on 9th of November, we've got a guest speaker from the Bank of England, Chief Economist Hugh Pill, who's done a number of these events and really enjoys speaking at ICAEW events. And that's going to look at sort of two main areas. The first is going to look at the national picture, what's happening in the economy nationally, what's going to happen with inflation and with interest rates, that sort of thing. And actually, they're both hot topics in the moment. But what we're also going to have is regional breakout rooms where you're really going to get sort of the detail at a local level. And that's where you can see a really close link to this campaign, where we're going to hopefully have some of the people who appeared in the films that you'll see actually being guests on panels at this event as well. So you get bringing those sort of stories to life.
And this is a virtual event?
Yes, it is, yes. And you can sign up via the ICAEW website.
That's great. Thanks very much, Suren. So, May, the deadline to register for filing a self-assessment return for 22-23, that was the 5th of October. Perhaps we should start with, if you've missed that deadline, what should you be doing now?
If you've missed the deadline, you should get in contact with HMRC as soon as possible if you do think that you need to file a tax return. Or you could get in touch with an advisor if you're not quite sure whether you do need to file a tax return or not.
OK, because there are penalties on there if you don't do this.
Yes, that's right. There are penalties in play. So HMRC are quite reasonable. If you have a reasonable excuse for the failure to notify was not deliberate, and you tell HMRC without unreasonable delay after your reasonable excuse has ended, then they don't typically seek to apply penalties. However, if you don't have this set of reasonable excuse, or perhaps you wait to tell HMRC, there may be tax-geared penalties in play, and these can range from 0% up to 100%.
So this is a serious matter. And obviously, if you're deliberately, concealing and not intending to file, that's a whole other thing.
If you are deliberately concealing the fact that you need to make a self-assessment tax return, there will be higher penalties in play.
So should we just run over who's covered by this? Who should be filing?
It won't affect all taxpayers because most taxpayers pay tax through pay as you earn, so it's automatically deducted by their employers. However, about 12 million self-assessment tax returns are made each year. So it affects people who have self-employment or partnership income, or perhaps property income from a rental property. Also, savings and investment income of £10,000 or more, or a total taxable income of £100,000 or more. So these are criteria that are set by HMRC. They're not particularly set out in legislation, but these are the administrative criteria that HMRC use to try and identify people who might have a self-assessment tax return obligation.
Now, the deadline for paper filing, that's October 31st, isn't it? And the deadline for digital filing?
That's the 31st of January, and that's also the deadline for payment of the self-assessment tax liability.
There are changes coming, aren't there, on the eligibility threshold next year?
Well, that's right. There are some changes. So this year, 2022-23, if you've got total taxable income of £100,000 or more, then you are supposed to make a self-assessment filing. However, the government have announced that from next year, only those who make £150,000 or more will need to make that self-assessment filing. People with income between £100,000 and £150,000, they will be able to be dealt with through the PAYE system.
Now, the freezing of the personal allowance and the higher rate tax band that was announced in November last year, that's going to make more people come under this net, presumably.
Yes, so those freezings of the threshold, they will mean that probably more people are earning over the personal allowance of £12,570. Maybe they've had to put prices up if they run a self-employment business. Maybe they've had to put rents up. So that will be drawing more people over this threshold and into the self-assessment tax system. That means more contact with HMRC. For those people, they should have made a registration by 5th of October. So if they haven't done so, then they should get in contact with HMRC.
And self-assessment is being reviewed more widely, isn't it?
Yeah, so the government has a 10-year tax administration strategy, and as part of that is a review and an update of the tax administration system in order to deliver a tax system fit for the future. So as part of that, there is this thing called the Tax Administration Framework Review. There's been a recent consultation on simplifying and modernising HMRC's income tax services, including a review of the self-assessment criteria, which means the criteria of who needs to file a self-assessment tax return.
But your sense is that HMRC, rather than changing thresholds, this is likely to be more about streamlining?
So one of the government priorities is simplification of the tax system. So I think that we might see some streamlining of the criteria from HMRC to simplify the process of registration, of identification, who needs to be within self-assessment, and possibly to bring it more in line with what creates a tax liability.
May, thanks for the update. Suren, thanks again. You'll find more information on both of the topics we just discussed in the show notes for the episode. That'll be on your app. Join us later in the month for October's In Focus podcast, when Suren will be back with some familiar faces from the Economies campaign to explore how British companies can go about attracting and retaining staff in the current challenging labour market. The Insights series is back in early November. Meantime, please do rate, review and share this episode and subscribe on your app so you never miss an episode. Remember, you can also sign up to daily, weekly or monthly newsletters from ICAEW Insights, so you'll get all the latest accountancy news in your inbox, but crucially only as often as you want it. Thanks for being with us.